Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. I want to thank you for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, otherwise known as the Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5 you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. If you'd like to join the ALPO, you can for as little as $18 a year. For more information, you can visit us on the internet at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And we're also on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy, and the podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, episode 60 of the Observer's Notebook. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Observer's Notebook. We're continuing our series of member profiles with this edition, and today we're talking to Steve Siedentop. Steve's an active contributor to the ALPO, and he's also the producer of the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Steve, and thank you very much for your continued support.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. You make me sound very important. I appreciate it.
Well, for the podcast, you're very important. Why don't you give everybody just a brief background about yourself, where you're from, occupation, that type of thing?
Okay. Well, let's see. I am originally from North Carolina. Grew up in a military town, and at about the age of 13, we moved to an itty-bitty town in Indiana. So we went from a very diverse community on the coast to a town of about 300 people in the middle of a cornfield, and that was kind of a big culture shock. That did, however, set me on my path to being involved in astronomy, because in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, I wasn't really able to see much of the night sky. But when I got out to the middle of nowhere in Indiana, suddenly I looked up and I thought, what are all those clouds? And it was the Milky Way, and I didn't know it at the time. So I lived in Indiana for a while. I graduated high school, went on to some college, joined the military, went back to college, and through the course of being a teenager and being in the military, I taught myself how to write computer programs. Back in the day, I had a Commodore 64 and got a subscription to Run magazine.
My first was a Trash 80.
Oh, a Trash 80, yes. So back at that time, you couldn't jump on the internet and download software. You got it in a magazine, and magazines are these things that are printed on paper, and they're bound together, and you actually get them in the mail. And you got to type in your software. And sometimes that would be an hour, sometimes that would be a week. And then you got to debug your software because A, you made typos, and B, it usually didn't work the first time anyway, even if you typed it exactly as it was printed. So that made me very good at what I do today. By day, I'm a software developer, and I think that path that I took gave me the edge in that I'm an excellent communicator, I'm an excellent troubleshooter, and I really enjoy digging into the technical details of pretty much anything that I do. And that's another thing that I love about amateur astronomy. I really feel like we're in the golden age of amateur astronomy today. You can go jump on Amazon.com and pick up off-the-shelf equipment and with a little bit of elbow grease and some expertise, produce images that rival stuff that the Hubble telescope was able to produce 20 years ago.
That's very true, and everything's so accessible right now, and it's like a double-edged sword though with the amateur astronomy, because people really don't want to get into it because they can download Hubble images and other people's. Damien Peach makes me not want to take astrophotos because there's no reason, no way I can compete with that.
I kind of feel like it's it's kind of like going to the grocery store. Do I want to the grocery store? Do I want to go to the grocery store and buy a fish from the deli, or do I want to go catch it myself and enjoy eating that fish? So it's a matter of personal preference. There are guys in the local club that I'm in that love the remote observatories because they hate getting out in the cold and sitting in the dew and the mosquitoes and everything else that we have in Georgia, and acquiring those images, and they just love the process. I enjoy both sides of it. I actually kind of equate amateur astronomy to fishing at a certain point, because at some point you have your telescope set up, and if you're observing, you may be waiting for something to come up and you're shooting the breeze with your friends. Or if you're imaging, your equipment's kind of doing its thing and you're waiting to see what you caught. And so I enjoy a lot of different aspects of amateur astronomy, not just imaging and not just lunar and planetary imaging.
The lures are a little bit more expensive though in astronomy.
They are a lot more expensive.
That's true. So, is there a person or an event that first sparked your interest in astronomy?
I think it was my mom. She got me a subscription to Ranger Rick magazine, and with that subscription came a free telescope, and it was a little refractor, maybe 50 millimeters. But I think I was being a pest one night, and she told me to go take my telescope outside and look at the moon, and that's what I did, and I was hooked. And that was my first Galileo experience.
How old were you then?
I think I was about 11.
Okay, Ranger Rick, huh?
Ranger Rick, yeah, I think Ranger Rick is still around. I'm pretty sure they're not giving away free telescopes these days, but yeah, no. I think they're still around.
Do you have a dream telescope, one that you would want to have if money was no object?
That is a great question, and kind of depending on my mood, that will determine the answer. So a good friend of mine who has passed away, his name is Art Zorka, and he was a member of the Atlanta Astronomy Club, and one of the people that was on the astronomy field the first night that I went out to the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club, which is actually what I'm part of, and he gave me a tour of the night sky. We were talking about telescopes and, what should I get? Because I was an adult and I wanted to get a real telescope. And I had all kinds of guidance, go get a 16-inch Dob and go get a refractor and go get a Schmidt-Cassegrain. And, a fist fight almost breaks out when you talk about refractors versus SCTs. But he said something that stuck with me to this day. He said, the best telescope is the one that you're going to get out and use.
Very true.
And yeah. And so I think my dream telescope probably would be something that I could A, stick a camera on, and B, pack up and take with me somewhere out to the middle of nowhere or out to the middle of somewhere, during an eclipse, for instance, because we have another one coming up. And my wife's cousins, the center line is going to run right through their front yard, so I may be hitting my buddies up for some bedroom space up in Ohio.
So what's the address, and can we rent rooms now?
Well, so we're actually forming an LLC, so I'll let you know, and I'll take your PayPal tonight.
Fantastic. We'll talk after the podcast. Very good. What's your current equipment? What are you using right now?
So I am kind of in a state of flux right now. I had a Skywatcher NEQ6 Pro, and that was at the Peach State Stargaze last year, and I got a chance to try some really nice telescopes from Explore Scientific on it. And one of them was their new, I think it's a 7.5 inch, 165 millimeter refractor, FPL 53 glass, I believe it is.
I've looked at that. That is a gorgeous telescope. Explore Scientific is doing really good.
Yeah, so Scott was there, and Scott says, "Hey, you want to try this?" And he hands it to me, and I said, "Scott, if I break this, I can't afford it." And he goes, "Don't worry about it. Just go ahead and take it," because that's the kind of guy he is. He gives the shirt off his back. And so I did that, and Greg Bragg, who was at Explore Scientific, convinced me to try out the Explore Scientific PMC8 mount, the G11 version. And so I have that set up, and I'm actually a member of the steering committee for the newly created PMC8 open source project. So if you are considering a controller for pretty much anything that might be related to or not related to astronomy, the PMC8 controller is very versatile, and it is now an open source project. So my little plug there. But yeah, I am using a G11 with the PMC8 motor controller on it. It is super smooth. It is a very stout platform, and I have a 5-inch triplet on it right now. And I have an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain that I'll break out for my lunar and planetary stuff.
Great. Now, talking about that, what are your current interests? You mentioned lunar and planetary and astrophotography, and I've seen some of your great photos on your Facebook page and things like that too. But what are your interests in astronomy?
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment on my images. I consider myself a sophomore at best, but so I really enjoy imaging Jupiter when I get the chance. Mars is cool and Saturn is cool, but if you're bored with Jupiter, wait 5 minutes and it'll be different.
Very true.
It rotates very, 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 very quickly, and about 1.5 minutes, I think, is about the longest you really want to spend on a single imaging run before you start to see smearing in your stacks, unless you're going to do some derotation with something like WinJupos. But I really enjoy Jupiter. It seems like every time I turn around, there's some kind of shadow transit or moon transit or some kind of challenge involved with Jupiter. So when it comes to planetary imaging, I really enjoy imaging Jupiter. When it comes to deep sky stuff, I find that right now I'm really interested in nebula, particularly the stuff that's up in the sky right now in the Northeast. I was imaging the Crescent Nebula, which is in Cygnus, and I decided to do some experimenting with the drizzle functionality in PixInsight. I don't know if you've ever worked with PixInsight, but
no, I have not.
So drizzle effectively increases the resolution of your image. And so I set it to drizzle 4x and came up with this massive 2.5, 3 gig file, this image file of the Crescent Nebula, and thought I would do some noise reduction on it. And it ran for 2 days and locked up my MacBook Pro.
Oh my goodness.
So you know what that means. I have to go buy a new one.
Computer.
So yes. I'm gonna have to get that one past the budget committee in my house. So that's gonna take a while. So anyway, I find that I enjoy the technical aspect of it, but I also enjoy observing, and I kind of cycle back and forth. I started out as an observer with a 12-inch Dob as a kind of my first real telescope. Was a Zoomel, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you remember that brand.
No, not familiar with that.
Yeah, I think they're gone now. They've been the same telescope has come back under a few different brand names, but I find observing to be very therapeutic. And some people do as well, and some people can't stand it. Some people can't imagine putting anything but a camera in their telescope. But I think what really kind of solidified observing as kind of an important activity for me. A friend of mine, Jack Fitzmyer, came up with this idea a few years ago at a Peach State Stargaze to play this game that we made up, and we called it Herschel Roulette. So if you're a member of the Astronomical League, there's a Herschel program,
right.
And the Herschel 400 will kick your butt.
I've done Messier marathons, so that's
you've done Messier marathons. Okay, so yeah, you need some big scopes or a lot of patience to do the Herschel 400, and so we came up with this idea. Let's do Herschel Roulette, and so Jack would call out a Herschel object, and go-tos were allowed because we had a lot of imagers there that we convinced to take the cameras out of their telescopes and put eyepieces in, and so the challenge was you had to name the constellation it was in, and then you had to look at the object and determine what kind of object it was. And that, for me, was therapeutic in that it included all of the activities of observing, but it also included kind of that social connection to the people that I was observing with.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, actually it is. It really was. And, throw a bottle of scotch in there, too, and it becomes even more fun.
Everything's fuzzy.
Yes. They're all faint fuzzies, yes.
That's funny.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Now, how long have you been a member of the ALPO?
Oh, gosh. I think maybe about 6 years now, maybe 7 years.
What got you involved with them?
Well, so a member of the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club got me involved. His name is Ken Pashedley, and you've probably heard of Ken. Ken
is one on the podcast.
Yes. So Ken lives about a mile from me, and he was one of the first people who talked to me at the first meeting I went to of Charlie Elliott Astronomy, and really started encouraging me to check out lunar and planetary stuff. And we also have Theo Romakers in the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club. He's a member in the who helps run the solar section. Right. Does a great job at that.
Great solar imaging.
Oh man, it's like every day he puts something up on the club's Facebook page. He is dedicated and he's good.
Yes, he is.
And so I got involved with the ALPO that way. I started helping out with the Facebook page, which was seeing zero activity. I think we had like maybe eight likes at the time, and basically what I started doing, I didn't really have any guidance. Somebody just said, "Hey, why don't you check out the Facebook page and see what you can do with it?" And it was kind of an informal arrangement where I would just jump in and help out as I could. And so what I started doing, I started scouring all of the Yahoo groups for that the ALPO images were being submitted on, and I would just stick them up on the Facebook page, and I would say, "Hey, so and so imaged Jupiter, and this is a shadow transit," and they did it from let's say Clyde Foster, who does a great job of submitting a lot of images from Centurion, South Africa, and I would do that, and I would try to do that, every day, every other day. And suddenly we went from like 8 likes to 50, and then we went from 50 to 150 to 300 to 500, and I think we're up around 5,000 maybe.
Fantastic.
I really don't pay attention to the likes. I really try to just focus on giving the imagers that are submitting images recognition, because it's easy to get out there in your driveway once in a while and do it, but it takes some real dedication to drag your stuff out and set it up and do that every night. And even if you have a permanent observatory, there is still a commitment and dedication required to do it in doing that. That's
very true. Yeah, I run the training program, and the key to graduating is making systematic observations. I mean, it's not one or two drawings of an object. I made 200 drawings of one crater in 18 months when I was in the training program in the 70s. So it's you got to put the work in to get it back, and it's just like and you become a better observer too the more you look through the telescope as well. Yes, you do. Interesting that you should bring that point up. Went to the eye doctor after having been a visual observer for about a year, and my left eye, which is the eye I use for my eyepiece,
my vision improved.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're able to pick up finer details.
Yes.
I've never heard anybody do that.
Yeah.
That's pretty. That kind of makes sense. In a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was cool.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Now you've mentioned the Atlanta Astronomy Club or the Charlie Elliott Astronomy Club. Is it the same thing?
Yes. So there's the Atlanta Astronomy Club, and then the only chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club is Charlie Elliott Astronomy. So Charlie Elliott Astronomy meets once a month out at the Charlie Elliott Wildlife Management Area, hence the name Charlie Elliott Astronomy. And we typically have a PhD candidate from Georgia State or Georgia Tech, or a real astronomer, and I say real astronomer, an astronomer, a working astronomer, because we're all real astronomers. Some of us just get paid and some of us don't. So a working astronomer come out and give a presentation on some current research, and then, assuming the weather cooperates, we'll make our way down to John Wood Astronomy Field and set up telescopes and imaging rigs and observe and image until the wee hours of the morning. And that's about a 45-minute drive from the east side of Atlanta. If you're in Atlanta, it's probably going to be maybe an hour and 10 minutes straight out east on I-20. And we meet once a month out there, ceastronomy.org if you want to check it out. And if you don't, that's cool too. But I have served in a few different positions there. When I came on as a member, there was maybe about 10 or 15 people that were kind of the core group, and they had lost a member who was he was kind of the heart of the group. His name was John Wood, and John was the kind of guy that if you were the last one set up on the field and everybody else had left, he wouldn't leave you there by yourself. He would hang out with you and he would stay with you, so you had another set of eyeballs on the woods, and just hang out with you. And he was so he ended up passing away, and the club that took a toll on the club emotionally, on a lot of the club members. And so when I came on board as a member, I didn't really know about this. I just noticed that there wasn't a whole lot going on. And I thought, I want this place to be something that my kids would want to come to when they're a little bit older. Because at the time, I had our first son in 2010 and our second son in 2011. We had them really close together. So, my house is always a train wreck, because that's what little boys do.
You've got young ones running around, don't you?
Yeah. Well, they're 8 and 7 now, so they're not too terribly young, but they're young enough to keep me tired. But that's a good thing. That's a good problem to have. So I think it was in 2011. I might have my dates wrong. As I get older, I notice my memory doesn't work quite as well as it used to. Larry Owens and Teo Ramakers approached me and said, "Hey, how do you feel about taking on being director in the club?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give it a shot." And so I changed a few things up. The first thing I wanted to do was, and stop calling it the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club, because when you're out shaking hands at an outreach event, hey, this is the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club. That's a lot to roll off the tongue. And so I thought, why don't we just call it Charlie Elliott Astronomy? For the purposes of social media, marketing, for the purposes of public outreach, we're Charlie Elliott Astronomy. Okay. On our charter, we are a chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club, and we are effectively, I guess I should say operationally, we are for the most part autonomous in that we have our own meetings, we have our own bylaws, we have our own elections, but we are a chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club and funded by the Atlanta Astronomy Club.
What's the membership?
Let's see. I think there's about 100 paying members on a good night. Well, let me say this. When one of the other things that I did was that I moved away from having members who were knowledgeable, and some of our members We got Ken Pashedley, we've got Rich Jakiel, who comes to meetings quite a bit. If you know Rich, he's been published in Sky and Telescope a few times, has a couple of books. Michael Covington, Dr. Covington comes out once in a while. So for some reason, Atlanta is a hotbed of amateur astronomy and imaging, and I can't figure out why, because the skies are terrible most of the time. But I moved away from having those guys who are very qualified and excellent speakers give presentations, and I started reaching out to anybody that would listen at the local universities, because what I found is that a prophet is never respected in his own land. Everybody knows Rich, and everybody loves Rich, but when they come out to an astronomy club meeting, they're very familiar with Rich. And so the kind of things that will get people out on a cloudy night, get them to drive an hour and a half or an hour or however long it takes on a cloudy night to go sit through an astronomy club meeting, are the kind of things they read about in the news. And so I've developed a relationship with a lot of the folks at Georgia State, and we've been able to get a lot of really good presenters from Georgia State and Georgia Tech, talking about everything from dark matter to searching for exoplanets to mapping surface features of stars, star spots, basically, you name it, it's run the gamut. And so now, on an average night, we'll have about 35 or 40 people at a meeting. And if the weather cooperates, we'll probably see 60 to 70 on the astronomy field with maybe 20 or 30 telescopes. And that's a typical night. I think the best night I've ever seen, we had about 60 people at a meeting, and we had about 150 on the astronomy field, and it was a great problem to have. You had to search for a parking spot.
That's fun. Yeah, I'm noticing a trend. Our local club here in Southern California is called the Ventura County Astronomical Society, and I was president 15 years ago or something like that, and every monthly meeting was an amateur astronomer talking about the sky. Mm-hmm. Well, I just rejoined the club about two months ago, and it was interesting. I was talking to one of the guys who have been there forever, and he said, now, since we're so close to JPL and Mount Wilson and things like that, we draw speakers from there, and what they do is like 3 out of 4 months are professionals, and then the 4th month is an amateur talk. Well, the attendance really drops when it's the amateur, and it's really interesting. I trying to wrap my head around it, but most of the members want to hear the big scientists talk because they're talking about the space probes and things like that as well. It's an interesting trend.
Yeah, what I find is that when people go to a meeting, they don't want to hear about something they can watch a YouTube video on. They want to hear about a scientist talking about research that they read about in a news story somewhere. And that's what gets people to drive an hour and a half on a night when it's cloudy out or rainy or cold or whatever. But yeah, that's great that you guys have JPL so close. I wish we had something like that. But I'm very pleased with the folks that have taken their time to come out and join us from Georgia State and Georgia Tech.
Oh, yeah, that's anytime you have a major university right around you. I mean, that's an excellent resource to draw from.
Yeah, this month we're second month in a row we're having somebody out who works with CHARA at Georgia State, the Center for Center for High Angular Resolution Astronomy, I believe it is.
Fantastic. Now you do a lot of outreach as well, don't you?
I do. So I have done some stuff with Stephen Ramsden of the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project, and I've met the folks at the Kosovo chapter once or twice, and Stephen has provided some equipment, and I'm very grateful for that, and I apprate it.
Now, did you travel to Kosovo for that?
I did not. Okay. Actually, Pranvera traveled here, and she was staying staying here in Atlanta, and I went to go see Stephen, and she was hanging out, and so we chatted for a bit, and it was cool. She is a very, very dynamic speaker, and I'm really glad to see she's doing what she's doing in her country.
That's fantastic. Do you have any other hobbies besides astronomy?
I enjoy building radio control airplanes, and I also I don't have any fish tanks now, but I kept angelfish for quite a while. And at one point a few years ago, before we moved to our current place, I had I think it was about a 100-gallon fish tank with 2 breeding pairs of angelfish, and they would, like clockwork, breed every 6 weeks.
Wow, that seems like a real relaxing hobby, though.
It can be.
It can be until your water goes crazy, right?
Yes. Yeah, I haven't built radio control airplanes in quite some time, so I just I enjoy my time on Real Flight Simulator.
Yeah, I recently bought a drone, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. That's
cool.
Oh, it's crazy. It's what they do now, and how the flight safety of the things and everything.
Oh, I know. I have a little drone that I take out with the boys once in a while. Nothing terribly fancy. It's if I crashed it, I wouldn't be out a ton of money, so that's a good thing. Yeah, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now, is there any additional information you'd like to share with the listeners about your experiences?
Let's see. So, as far as myself, I also enjoy cars. When I was in the Army, I had a Ford Mustang GT, and I used to race that in Augusta, Georgia. I took that a few times up to the racetrack in North Augusta, South Carolina, right across the state line, where they would have grudge night, and that was always a lot of fun.
Well, you talking like drag racing or
drag racing? Yes,
oh,
it was great because it got the kids off the street. It got the kids on a racetrack, and you actually got a time slip to prove that your car was the fastest. And you could also do bracketing, where you would go up against, let's say, there was a guy that I remember one night had a Ford Ranger, and he was racing against a Corvette. And that was the first time I had seen that. And I'm like, what in the world are these guys doing? Well, they were doing bracketing. They had to accurately predict what they were going to run. And so whoever was closest to their estimated time was the one that won.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's fun stuff. So yeah, I turned my own wrenches quite a bit.
But you're not racing for pink slips like we used to in the old days, huh?
No. No. Even I've done a lot of dumb things in my youth, but that was not one of them.
Well, a part of this member profile, I don't know if you're familiar with the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio.
I am, yes.
Yeah, there's a list of questions that they ask at the end, and it's the same questions, and I've developed the same type of thing for this. So it's
awesome. Kind
of free form, and we'll just see where we go. Ready?
Perfect. Ready.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you?
If nobody's watching, probably an 8.
An 8, huh?
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate?
So I am probably the most anal retentive slob that you will ever meet. And so I have this thing where I have to, my room may be, my workshop is a mess, but I have to have things lined up. So my laptop, for instance, is the line of my laptop, I like it to be parallel with the edge of my table, and I like my pencils to be parallel with my laptop. Everything else is a freaking mess.
Really?
But I have geometric symmetry with certain things.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my things. It drives my wife nuts. She's like, how do you do this?
All right. What's the furthest you have traveled for an astronomical event?
The furthest that I have traveled for an astronomical event. Not too terribly far, actually. I'm pretty fortunate to have been able to be a part of a lot of different events. We did a Mercury transit event here. We did a Venus transit event here. I did a big solar eclipse event at my boys' elementary school, where we estimated, based on the number of glasses we handed out, there was about 3,500 people there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and we weren't even at totality. We were at like 99.8%. So I think the furthest is probably about maybe 200 miles.
You missed totality by 0.2%.
So let me tell you,
Steve,
let me
we need to have a
hang
talk.
on,
We need
hang
to have a
on,
talk.
hang on. Let me explain that one. So it was really torn about that. I really wanted to go see totality because I have not seen it before, but I decided that I wanted to spend it with my boys at their school. And so I had, the Easy Up set up and the table with a couple of iMacs and a couple of cameras one in a white light scope, one in a hydrogen alpha scope. And so I could have an entire class at a time around a couple of iMacs. And I was the coolest dad in the entire school.
Okay. 2 words for you next time. Field trip.
Yes. Field trip. Yes. Yes. I plan. Yeah. My plan is to travel for 2024.
Okay. Good. All right. What's your go-to order from your favorite hometown restaurant?
That would be Dogwood Pizza, and they're a little kind of a mom and pop pizza place, and they make the most awesome calzone that I have ever had. It is just loaded with grease, and it is wonderful.
Georgia?
Yes, okay. Yes. Dogwood Pizza in Lawrenceville, Georgia.
Okay. What kind of pizza do you order?
I usually get a calzone, and they put about 5 or 6 different kinds of meats in it, so it's dripping with grease, and it is just wonderful.
Great. Now the next one, I think you've already answered, but we'll ask you anyway. What's your most memorable astronomical event?
Yeah, it'd be the eclipse with my boys.
I hope so. All right. Are there any books or tools that have helped you on your astronomical journey?
Yes, the Annals of the Deep Sky by what are the names of the authors? I have it right here on my shelf. By Jeff Knipe and Dennis Webb, and I think I pronounced Jeff's last name correctly. But I really enjoy reading through that from time to time. And another book that I rely on heavily. I'm the observing coordinator now for Charlie Elliott Astronomy, so I give a presentation every month on what you can expect to see in the evening sky on a given night. Is the Observer's Handbook from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and I have 2019 in the house finally.
There you go. All right, good books. Good books. If you were stranded on a dark site, deserted island, what telescope would you want with you?
Probably a big Dob, because I wouldn't have to worry about batteries. I'm assuming if I'm stranded, I'm probably not going to have electricity.
Okay, all right. If you were stranded on a dark site, deserted island, what music would you want with you?
Oh, so my go-to music for my astronomy events, club member Barry Fitzgerald turned me onto this. It's called I think it's NRV Net. And it's sort of like trance, but what they've done is they've taken the transmissions from the Apollo missions and overlaid them to some very nice background music. So it's very cool. Yeah,
really,
it's awesome. It's awesome.
Is that online?
It was online for the longest time, and it kind of disappeared. But I think if you do a search for N as in November, R as in Romeo, V as in Victor, net.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to check that out. I want to hear about this Magnificent Desolation put to music.
Yes, there you go.
All right. What advice would you give the 12-year-old you? On life?
Let's see.
On life.
Advice in life. Don't take things quite so seriously. And be nice to as many people as you can. Yeah, and that has served me well. I try to do that in outreach, even when it's right at the end and you're dead tired, and you don't want to talk to another 10 or 15 middle school kids. But you never know. They get fingerprints on everything, but you never know. One of those kids could be the first one to set foot on Mars.
There you go. And I do a lot of school programs, and that's what I tell the kids. And it's amazing when I do programs, I tell them, how many people are in space right now? And they're like, none. And for the age groups I'm dealing with, like 10-year-olds, there's been a man in space since they were born,
Yeah, yeah,
constantly.
yeah. I
And
mean,
they
a lot
just
of these
can't
kids,
they can't wrap their head around that.
yeah, and a lot of these kids have never known a world without an International Space Station.
Right, right. All right, number 9. This is the important one.
Okay.
Cake or pie?
Ooh, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with pie.
What kind?
I'm gonna go with pie. I am a big fan of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream on it.
All right, yeah, I'm a Dutch apple pie kind of guy. Yeah. All right. Who has had the most single influence in regard to astronomy?
The most single influence in regard to astronomy. The individual. The individual. I would probably say a guy named Phil Sacco. He's a master observer, and he was one of the ones that was out in the field the first night that I went to Charlie Elliott Astronomy, and he and Art Zorka took time to show me everything that I was doing wrong and show me how to do it right, and gave me a tour of the sky and reminded me of why I was interested in astronomy.
Wonderful. I like that.
And I still talk to Phil today. He's a mentor of mine. As far as the hobby is concerned, if I have if every now and then, you need to refocus and reset, and he's a good person to go talk to for me.
That's good. That's good. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we shut this down?
No, I think I'm good.
This was
Thanks
fun. This was fun.
This was, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
If people want to get a hold of you, how do you recommend they do that?
You can look me up on Facebook, Steve Siedentop, Siedentop. You can also reach me by email at program@ceastronomy.org.
Perfect. And I'll put the link for your email addresses in there, as well as the link for the Charlie Elliott Astronomy.
Awesome.
Okay. Sound good?
Thank you.
Well, Steve,
Very good.
I again want to thank you for your awesome support of the podcast. It means a lot to me, and you have single-handedly really helped keep it alive over the years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the work you're putting into doing this, because this does require a level of dedication and commitment that you don't see a lot of times today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
All right. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I really want to thank our special member profile guest, Steve Siedentop, for coming on and talking about him and what he's doing in astronomy. Thank you very much, Steve. We upload new episodes of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. You can also listen on iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and Amazon Echo. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership and producer credits on the podcast. And you know who does that? Steve Siedentop. He's got a year free membership, and he's also the producer of the podcast. So again, thanks, Steve. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. You can contact me via email at commentman@commentman.net, or on Twitter at @ObserversNBPod. You can join the ALPO. Membership begins at only $18 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And the podcast has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.